Hey guys, Mr. Stallings here. Today we're going to go over the judicial branch in Georgia's state government.
What would you say you do here?
That's a great question. Now, the judicial branch has actually got two main purposes. Number one, and probably the most important purpose, is that it interprets the state constitution. This means that it's going to look at laws that are passed and to see if they are actually violating the rights of Georgia's citizens. The second purpose that it has is to administer justice to those people who commit crimes within Georgia. Now, there are three types of courts that we have in Georgia. The first court, the court that's at the bottom, most common court, is the trial court, followed by the appellate court, and of course, the Georgia Supreme Court. Now, we're going to start with the Georgia State Supreme Court. All right. So, Georgia State Supreme Court is considered the highest court in the land, which means that their decision is final within the state of Georgia. You could possibly appeal your case to a higher court. The only higher court would be the United States Supreme Court. Their main duty is to review cases that involve the constitutionality of the law. Again, they're going to check to see if a law is unconstitutional and protect the rights of Georgia citizens. They are considered an appellate court, which means that they hear cases that have already been heard by lower courts. Your court case does not typically start at the Georgia State Supreme Court. You got to work your way up the ladder to get here. An interesting thing about the Georgia State Supreme Court, this is not like a normal court like you would go to if you had a speeding ticket or divorce court or something like that. There are no juries, there are no witnesses. Basically, they're going to go over and look at the evidence for a case. They don't hear any new evidence. This is evidence that the original courts provide to the court. All right, so with the Georgia State Supreme Court, we have 9 total judges. They are elected by popular vote. They serve a 6-year term limit, and there is no limit on the consecutive terms. So you can be elected a Georgia State Supreme Court justice, and every 6 years you can run again. And if you're elected, you could serve on this court as long as you get elected. There is no age limit to this. So you can start being a Supreme Court justice after you've practiced law for 7 years, which is kind of interesting. So they don't just say that, hey, you got to be 36 to be a Supreme Court justice. They just say you have to practice law for 7 years. Right. The next court we're going to look at is the appellate court. This is a court of appeals. Very similar to the Supreme Court. They only hear cases that lower courts have heard already. They have 12 judges. Just like the Supreme Court, they are elected by popular vote. They also serve a 6-year term. Right. Finally, we have the trial courts. And this is the most common type of court in Georgia. Trial courts are going to look at 2 different kind of cases. The first type of case is a civil case. Civil cases handle disputes between people or groups. So when you think of civil cases, I want you to think of like Judge Judy or any of those like daytime TV judges. They're going to handle any kind of like little dispute between people. And usually this is going to be about money or something like divorce or something along those lines where people are just having a dispute between themselves. No law is being broken. And the second type of court or case trial court actually hears is the criminal case. So this is going to involve violations of the law. This is like your normal crime, speeding tickets, theft, that sort of thing.
If you can't do the time, don't do the crime. Okay, time's up.
In the United States, we have 2 types of crimes. The first type is a misdemeanor. Now, this is going to be your more common types of crime, going to be less serious. It's going to include things like shoplifting, trespassing, and speeding. If you commit a misdemeanor, your punishment, you could expect less than 1 year in prison and a fine of less than $1,000. On the other hand, more serious crimes are called felonies. These tend to be violent in nature, or it's going to include things like murder, burglary, arson, kidnapping, or theft of like really expensive things. The punishment for a felony is much more severe. You're going to get a year plus in prison and a fine of $1,000 or more. Now, if you also commit a felony in the state of Georgia, you do have a potential to lose your voting rights.
Tap, tap, tap. Case ended.